welcome to QTB Legends, where legends of the gaming industry come to tell their story. My name is Nick, and I am joined, as always, by the bird to my Jordan, the telestrator to my John Madden. It is the one and only QTB's Brad. What's going on, man?
Nick, I am doing fantastic because we've got another great episode in store for our listeners, and we are so fortunate to have Don Traeger back with us tonight. Nick, how pumped are you?
I'm ready because that first episode, man, I mean, from Paperboy to, teasing some of the upcoming content that we have, like Shaq Fu, and even today's topic, with the carts and all the fascinating story of how EA reversed engineered stuff. I mean, Don, there's a lot to get excited about. So I'm gonna turn it over to you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome. Thanks, guys. Good to be here again.
Well, great. Well, just for our listeners to remind everyone, Don Traeger, I mean, an industry gaming pioneer, game developer, game marketer, co-founder of EA Sports. I mean, we could go on and on with your credentials and credits and successes, and we are so honored to have you here today. To remind our listeners where we left off, we last finished last episode with the epic story of EA Sports origin story, and how we've ended with that EA's clash with ESPN and the amazing turn of events where ESAN was finished, but EA Sports was birthed, right? And with this new brand, and so we're really excited today to really kind of look forward. And now at that time, EA was still mostly in the computer gaming industry, right? And so today we're really looking at how EA moves to carts, and really your battle and interactions with Nintendo and Sega. So we're really excited to get into that today, Don. So I guess for me, starting out, I think we're looking back into the late 80s when you're at EA, where you guys were largely successful in computers. What was the start? How did you guys decide to venture into the cart world?
Well, it was kind of a battle for a couple of years. It started slow and kept growing. There was a small group of people that really believed that we should be doing carts. Mostly some of the sales guys, of course, because they were seeing the numbers. Myself, because I was focused mostly on the action arcade stuff on Commodore 64, that was the stuff that was getting licensed to other companies for the NES. So after a while, I started getting frustrated that all my stuff was getting licensed and that we couldn't do it ourselves. But Trip had some valid reasons at the time to be wary of the cartridge business. We mentioned a little bit before, people I think still were a little gun shy about the cartridge business, that it might be too much like a toy, might have a Christmas or two and go away. And computers were viewed as more of a long-term, strategy for software development. The other thing about the cartridge business that Trip really didn't like was the control that the cartridge manufacturers like Nintendo and Sega would have over the publisher. So once you sign that deal, traditionally they do all the manufacturing. They do the testing. You're subject to some variability there and some risk in that. If you had a particular target date in mind, they might not accommodate that if they weren't ready to release your game. So there was some risk there that Trip didn't like, and additionally, he wasn't used to paying royalty to somebody else to sell games. That didn't sit very well with him either. So I understood all those issues, and everybody did, and we supported them. But at some point, the numbers became so large for some of the NES titles that you just couldn't look away.
So was it just the numbers and the sheer numbers, or what else about that made you feel more comfortable about wanting to move and compete in the cartridge or console world? It seems like you were maybe one of the few that were advocating for that.
Yeah, I was, and then some of the sales guys were. I got more confident every time we did another license, and Even if they weren't top sellers, like Skate or Die was a top seller for Konami. Some of the other ones weren't top sellers, but they still did huge numbers. So I had a lot of confidence that what we were doing could be successful in the cartridge world, and I wanted to go there, as did a few other people.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how those licensing deals went early on, even with your early titles? I mean, I think our listeners would love to know how those discussions go, or when do you know you've won that deal, or what was the break point? What was the, like, if we don't get this, we're out?
Well, you mean in terms of like licensing Skate or Die to Konami or something like that?
Exactly.
So actually, as the producer of Skate or Die, I figured out what platforms got them going. But once it was out, then the licensing fell into the biz dev group and the sales group. So they would go out and field those licensing deals. But here's one funny story that happened around this time, and it was also fuel to the fire for me to, like, we should be doing this ourselves. So after Skate or Die was a big hit for Konami, they had a action game brand for Nintendo called Ultra. So it was Konami Ultra, and Skate or Die was a big hit. A few months later, they were coming over to meet with Larry Probst, the head of sales, and who had some business connections with guys at Konami, to talk about licensing more stuff. So one morning, Larry came over to my cube looking kind of concerned and said, "Hey, I got Konami coming over to talk about another license. What do you got?" And I'm like, "Give me an hour." So I ran over to Michael Kasaka's cube, and we had talked about a sequel to Skate or Die called Ski or Die, but not more than 5 minutes at the coffee machine. So I told Michael what was going on. Konami was here, and he said, "Okay." And he whipped out a white paper with pencil sketches of different events and everything in like under an hour. So I ran that back to Larry, and I handed him the white paper. And about an hour later, he comes walking over with a big smile on his face and a check from Konami, for 25 grand, which at that time was a lot of money. And he said,
Wow.
"Hey, not bad for an hour's work." And I said, "Yeah, now
No
I got to
kidding.
build this sucker though." So that was pretty funny. And, that kind of stuff could still happen, but most of the licensing, it was handled by biz dev, and it was kind of out of my control. Early on, when we first did Jordan Bird, that was with Milton Bradley, and I was a little more involved in that one with the Milton Bradley guys, and because we needed Michael to have be down with what they're doing. So I was a little more involved with that one, but it kind of just got handed off to biz dev, and then I was on to my next thing.
Well, you mentioned Larry Probst. I think at the time you mentioned he was the current head of sales, but later became a longtime CEO of EA.
Yeah.
Don't you have another anecdote about kind of him and yours interaction around kind of how maybe you guys got into wanting to start the console game company, or
Yeah,
getting into console games?
Well, this frustrations were kind of mounting, and Larry was really gung ho about doing carts. Bing probably was. I don't recall as much. Trip was still against it. I was for it. A few other people. So at one point, in the midst of these issues and our growing frustration for not doing it, we were at our annual summer company picnic, and Larry was standing over on a hillside, and he motioned me over, and I came over up the hill, and he goes, "Don, look over the field here. Who would you want to take along if we were going to start a cartridge game company?" And I was kind of surprised at first, and then I started pointing out guys. So later I learned that another guy that he was talking to about doing it was a guy named Jim Wims, who went on to head up the first launch of the Sony PlayStation for Sony. But before that, he had been, I think, an Activision or iMagic guy, and he was a friend of Larry's. And so Larry was talking to him, and they wanted me to come do product development if we were going to do that. And then later on, Jim Wims became one of the VCs that backed my company when I went solo. So things come back around in circle. It would have, I would have done it in a second because I thought Larry was awesome. He's a really smart guy, really great salesman. And, it was just kind of a brainstorm idea. I think there was more pressure on Trip to get into carts than I realized at the time.
Oh, I gotta have a quick aside. I mean, it's got to be a crazy moment to sit there and have someone go, I want to start this. I want you to tell me who you want to pick for a team, right? Like, what's that experience like to sit there and you're at a company picnic, right? So you think you're just there to celebrate, have a good time, and all of a sudden this like big idea hits the hillside, right?
Well, there was drama growing about getting into carts. We were getting our angst up, to do something, and we were getting tired of kind of being what I called second fiddle. I told some people at the time, EA is awesome. It's like this high-end software boutique company, and I want to do carts. That was the sentiment of some of us at the time.
Well, didn't you take that sentiment to heart enough to where you actually decided to leave?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So there was a few things going on at EA at the time. One was, there was some growth going on, and so some people were kind of unsettled. Some of the people that I had worked with really closely at EA left one day to go to this reinvention of Activision at the time, and they bought the Activision company because Activision, after the crash of the Atari, Activision was hurt, and these guys bought it out and renamed it Mediagenic, and they were going to be a new player in software and video games. So these guys all went to Mediagenic, and they were kind of like, come on, Traeger, come on over. We're going to do carts and blah, blah, blah. And so I was getting more frustrated at EA and not doing the cartridge thing that I finally left. And, I just said, hey, I'm sorry, but I just feel compelled. I gotta get in the cartridge game. And if we're not going to do it, it's sad, but I gotta leave. So anyway,
did you coin the phrase boutique computer software company? Or was that a first?
No, that you kind of see that around, like boutique software was kind of like high end, low volume, stuff for the right people. It just wasn't my thing. I like, there was it's funny in the US. There was like Apple, which was kind of high-end stuff. And then there was Commodore, which was marketed at kids and low-end and, cheaper. And so the market was definitely dichotomous. Apple II tended to have deluxe music construction set, or, like Prince of Persia was a beautiful game done on the Apple II, where Commodore 64 kind of had more of the, like I've been saying, the teenage male, action shoot 'em ups kind of games. So there was some difference in the markets, but
yeah. So I was thinking I was going to quiz Nick here. Nick, how long do you think Don stayed at Mediagenic? Just out of curiosity. Do you think he published a bunch of games, a bunch of console games under Mediagenic?
I have no idea. I guess what, six weeks?
All right, Don, why don't you tell him how long you're at Mediagenic?
Okay, thanks. Okay, so Monday morning comes, I get in my car, I drive over to Mediagenic, which is closer to my house. It was just right over here in Menlo Park. And I get in, and I see my friends, and I'm sitting there, and the CEO comes in and talks to me, and I look around, and I can't explain exactly why, but I immediately started getting cold feet. Like, what have I done? You
Mm,
know, there was something about the culture or something about the people. I just didn't, instantly I just like, this isn't right.
bad vibes.
So by lunchtime, I had gotten in my car, drove back to EA, sat down with Trip, and he said, "Hey, we've been." It wasn't just because I quit for a morning. Uh, the wheels were in motion for EA to do carts, and I just didn't know it at the time. So, I got back to EA, and I said, "Hey, I was just over at Mediagenic for a morning, and I didn't like it." He goes, "Hey, come on back. Everything's cool. We're gonna do carts. Just to let you know, we've been working on that. I don't know for sure, but I suspect like the board of directors at EA was kind of pushing them into compliance."
I don't know,
Um,
Don. It sounds like you leaving maybe was the checkmate on the board here, right?
yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So
I
wait,
I
you
I
you
doubt
clocked
that,
in?
but anyway, it was
4
funny
hours.
because it was
did you-
like 3 or 4 hours.
Did you get paid for that? Did you get a check?
I don't remember, but I do remember that as part of my comeback, Trip up my salary and gave me some more stock. So
Nice.
Hey, well, look
the
at
little
that.
4-hour boycott worked.
Nice.
Well, you mentioned about company culture and how that wasn't a good fit for you. How much do you feel company culture or atmosphere plays into the success of game development? Like, do you really feel like that is a big part of why EA was successful, or you felt comfortable doing what you did there?
Yeah, I think so. And later on, I felt like the culture changed and it got more kind of more competitive and almost kind of nasty. But early on in those days, it was a very cooperative environment. Very well run. Trip had established, a set of company values and virtues that people really bought into. Um, so yeah, I think the culture was really important.
Well, good. Well, I think now we've finally come to the terms, or we've heard now that EA is in on the cart game, right? So,
Right.
what about what your previous experience, maybe with the Amiga, or what things made you guys feel primed to jump into that development with carts?
Yeah. So pretty interesting and kind of unbeknownst to most of us, I think, was the fact that the years that we spent doing the Amiga and working on that and building, we built a set of development tools through some of the like productivity products that we put out on the Amiga, even though nothing sold that well because the Amiga wasn't real successful. I think I mentioned before, EA was very successful on the Amiga because anybody who had an Amiga owned EA software. So even though it was a small market, we had a really high, abnormally, unusually high market share. But those products also were higher end, and I think the first Amiga was like 16-bit, and then I think they came out with a 32-bit machine. So we had a jump start on doing development for the next generation of consoles. When they came out, they were 16-bit, and we'd already been doing that for a couple of years. And a lot of the guys that were doing NES carts now had to step up and learn things that we'd been doing for a couple of years. So that wasn't the grand strategy. Let's start with the Amiga, then we'll do Genesis. But it worked out that way, and it was just kind of like fortuitous great luck that we could kind of hit the ground running with the fourth generation console machines, the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, with development tools and things that we had learned on the Amiga.
That's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
you've mentioned Nintendo now, you've mentioned Sega, and earlier in our talk, you mentioned a little bit about the console gaming atmosphere and those publishing and developing agreements. Why did you guys seem to have a different approach with Nintendo and maybe signing those agreements versus being very against signing deals with Sega?
Yeah. So, and this was really all Trip. And when I think back on those days with Trip, that was like when he was at his like peak uh, entrepreneurial, awesome bravado. And so even though I wanted to do carts really bad, I still always appreciated his kind of almost audacity in a way as a CEO, not to let anybody push him around, except the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Nintendo, who had built up such a huge business that you really couldn't, you really didn't have much leverage against them. So um, when when Sega started talking about getting in the business, Trip is like, "Who's Sega? Why should they have all this control over our business? They shouldn't." Uh, with Nintendo, you really couldn't fight them. They were just too big.
So then how did you counter Sega? What was EA's, another plan? Like, what did you guys do to counter that?
Yeah, so unbeknownst to say, and unbeknownst to everybody, because it was very confidential, and even us producers didn't get much information. We were going to do Sega carts, and we were going to do them on our own, independently, without an agreement from Sega, no license. So to do that, what's typically done in the technology business is you set up a clean room, and a clean room is really tightly controlled. Yeah, there's a development system. Tightly controlled development environment where only the engineers working on the reverse engineering the Sega Genesis, basically figuring out how to do carts, how to beat the copy protection, how to do everything independently. So you had all these engineers in the clean room, and I remember a guy named Monty Finnefrock, who later on became my boss, was involved overseeing it. Another really brilliant technologist who had come over in a development tool acquisition for the Amiga, Luke Bartolet. He was running the technology thing, and we just couldn't. It was hands off for us. We couldn't touch it. We couldn't talk about it. And EA was really serious. There was no messing around with the clean room. You just had to wait until they came up with a set of development tools and things that they could then hand to us that were completely from the clean room, re-engineered, nothing, no patents, nothing violated, nothing stolen from Sega, everything completely original and independent of anything they had done.
Really is incredible.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Nick,
it was amazing.
That sounds like, it's like secret agent stuff, right? Like, like top secret. Like, what were the strict guidelines? How did they ensure that, who had access, or how did you make sure that didn't get out? I mean, in today's world, I feel like that would be one person speaks, and it's out in the world, right?
It was just tightly controlled. I think they were on their own floor. EA is expanding, and now we had a couple of floors, and I think they were up one floor above. No access, and we were real serious about it because Trip and Larry and everybody, they really made sure that we understood. Hey, we're this stuff is very serious. We can have no breaches. We don't want any lawsuits, and so we were all real compliant and cautious about honoring all the clean room stuff and not having any breaches or violations. I mean, wow. It was really cool. Like, we were like, this is awesome. And it's again, when I said, Trip was just like leading the charge on it, and it was pretty awesome.
I mean, and Nick, I know you showed the picture. Do you have any questions about that experience or about the clean room concept?
I mean, I try to look at it from Sega's perspective, right? You almost have to be completely flabbergasted that this company that would be relatively unheard of at the time, right, of EA compared to today, for them to be like, yeah, here's our deal, take it or leave it, or just make your own carts. And you're like, you know what? We'll make our own carts. I can't imagine being in Sega's boardroom when they finally see, the finished product. And what I'm putting on the screen right now is one of the results of that, which is the very iconic yellow tab cartridge, right? That anybody that was in the vicinity of a Sega Genesis, they most likely saw one of these because most of EA's games had that cartridge. And that was essentially, not only did you reverse engineer that dev kit, Don, but you also created these custom carts, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, the thing is, we completely controlled our own manufacturing process on the Sega. We didn't have to submit our stuff to them for QA. Nintendo, you submit a game, it could be in there a month, and then if they find a bug, then you got to start all over again. And we had our own QA department and felt comfortable with our own testing, and then we had our own manufacturing and could completely control that. And make sure that and this became more important for sports releases, is targeted release dates. So we didn't want a queue or somebody else's game that had higher priority in the manufacturing process. We wanted to control all that. And then the other thing it did, it let us, which we did on the Sega Genesis, it let us do special runs. We could do, like, I could whip off the Dream Team and we could kind of crank it out, or we did, special versions of Madden just for the Genesis. And, one we did was really exclusive and rare to find today. It's a release that was just done for Blockbuster rentals. So it gave us a lot more freedom to do those kind of things and act like we always acted, our own independent company, versus Nintendo, where you had to be, more wary about the lead times and stuff. But I want to say, Nintendo were awesome to work with. I loved working with Nintendo. They never jacked us around with dates. What they said counted. That we never had problems that way. It was more expensive, and they did have some control, and they manufactured the carts, but they were pretty wonderful to work with, and they had an awesome test group up there and a tote board with the number of callers in on any one day, and it'd be like 3 million QA calls today. I was like, holy smokes, it was pretty impressive. So I understood Tripp's wanting to be independent with Genesis, but I got to say the Nintendo folks were always pretty cool to us too. So, we had no problems with them.
So you mentioned a little bit. I mean, that's amazing. Two completely different experiences, but you mentioned having your own independent manufacturing capabilities and you being able to rip off and have your own cart at any time. How drastic of a difference is that timeline when you're doing it independently and you've got an idea and you can quickly do it and maybe put it out versus waiting for Nintendo's approval? Like, are we talking months? I mean, what's the difference like?
Oh yeah, months and months. Maybe 6 months or more. It depends on the time of year. You had to be really careful for Christmas releases, because you had to get your stuff in by August or September. Otherwise, the Nintendo queue was just too long, and you were going to miss it. So it just made you have to be even more conscious about the dates than you even already are, and it's already a big pain, and so those timelines made it worse. I'd say 6 months.
Wow,
for sure.
Yeah,
that's a big difference. I mean,
it's huge.
Half a calendar year,
and I don't think people realize. Yeah, it was a pain, and especially for us coming from the software business. We had no constraints like that, and so the way that we started thinking about the Genesis made a lot more sense for us.
Well, that's interesting, because I know I was gonna say, Nick, we spent a lot of time on our podcast, or our regular weekly podcast, talking about game releases and delays and how that all plays into the hype and the success of the release, right? So it's interesting to hear, even back with these early games, like that being such a critical aspect to launch, right? Don, do you have any like thoughts about how today we're seeing these massive launches kind of either get delayed or there be a lot of hype and there be kind of this backlash that it wasn't what it was supposed to be? I mean, what do you see today versus maybe how you saw it then with even the licensing deals with Nintendo or your independent launches? Do you see any similarities or differences from then to today?
Well, there's similarities, but everything is an order of magnitude larger and so much more expensive. Uh, these releases are just massive and they're huge, and the teams are, hundreds of people, and we'd have like 5 guys on a project, so it's just completely different. And uh, there's so much dollars at stake now, and the rewards can be so high, uh, versus coming out and laying an egg, that I think they have to just be a lot more concerned and worried about delays. Two, also, there was a time where everything wasn't franchises and sequels of engines and things, so, now there's so much at stake for these big brand franchises, it's like a Marvel movie. You can't, you can't mess it up. Uh, so it's just the dollars just make it almost apples and oranges.
Do you feel like the impact or the impact or the severity of those dollars impacts the ability to be free flowing and creative in the development? Like I feel like maybe games sacrifice or take a hit because they've got a timeline or there's so much anticipated revenue expected with these releases. Do you feel like that would be a lot of pressure as a developer or as a lead of a team?
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, and uh, it's kind of an oppressive development atmosphere, actually, when you're just kind of grinding out the next sequel of something, and you've got 8 features handed to you by marketing that you have to have, and then there's some bugs you got to fix, and a few new things that you want to do. Most of it is just kind of becomes, I don't know, it almost can feel like factory work, not creative anymore, which is a problem, and it's one of the issues of feeding the beast.
Yeah, I think that anecdote that you gave earlier, Don, about literally creating, a back of the napkin pitch to Konami and getting them to write you a check to fund a game. Yeah, I mean, I think the gaming industry's become so refined and methodical and corporate now that, there's no way I'm going to call up, Activision Blizzard and be like, hey, here's an idea for a game I came up with an hour. Give me
Yeah.
the $100 million I need to fund this AAA
Right.
game, and I'll see you in
Right.
10 years.
It could never happen. In fact, another funny story along those lines. When Dave Ralston, my partner for many years at Atari and then to EA, designed Paperboy, the first time he was designing it was at a brainstorm. We were at the Prince of Wales pub in San Mateo, and he diagrammed Paperboy on a cocktail napkin.
Literally on the back of a napkin.
Yeah, on the back of a cocktail napkin. And the thing was, we were all really hooked on the old arcade game Zaxxon, and it was a diagonal. The way that you cheated in the old days to get 3D is when you go diagonal, so everything kind of looked 3D, but it wasn't. So he said, "I got this idea," and he laid out, a street on a cocktail napkin and drew out some buildings and had a little Paperboy on there. And I wish we still had that cocktail napkin, because but yeah, I mean, you could never do that now. There's no way.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing though. I mean, just to think about just a hand sketch, an idea. To me, it's faith in people more than contracts and dollars and liability. That to me tells people believed in ideas and believed in people that you could deliver that with just an idea on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Well,
you know.
it also, it was a time when you could come up with a little idea like that, and it was like, wow, that's really cool. Nowadays everything has been done a million times, and I used to tell people on my team, think of the craziest game, donkey back basketball, and I guarantee you somebody in Japan is doing it.
Absolutely.
It's like it's just got crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, you mentioned earlier a little bit about Tripp and his, at that peak, I would say, visionary status and self-confidence, and really having that in your back pocket, that independent manufacturing capabilities and having those titles ready to go for launch. How did that kind of improve your status, or kind of give you the leverage with Sega in those publishing, developing agreements?
If there was a time machine and I could go back and be a fly on the wall in the EA boardroom room when Tripp had the Sega guys in and showed them all the carts, I would love to have been there, because the jaws must have been on the floor, because it was secret, and nobody knew about it. So he had the Sega guys over, and he basically said, so I wasn't there. A lot of this was confidential, but the gist of the meeting was, here's what we're doing. We're not going to do your license. We'll work with you, but he was ready to roll, solely independent, and we had all these carts made, ready to go, and a lot of sports stuff, and it was awesome stuff. So,
checkmate, right?
Huh?
I was gonna say checkmate, right, Nick?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, that was Tripp at the max.
So, I mean, how much of that, I mean, like, what were royalty rates back then? I mean, like, can you give us any insights to the inner workings of the contracts? Do you know?
I don't even remember. I don't know if it was a couple of points or how they worked it out. I just know he didn't feel like Sega deserved anything from our creativity, and he did not want them controlling the manufacturing cycle, for sure. Those were his big pet peeves, and it was hard to argue with. I agreed.
Well, didn't he also help you? Didn't you guys also help them kind of save one of their own games? Isn't there a little story with that?
Yeah. So as a result of the negotiation, it's kind of fun now, because like with the EA Sports thing, ESPN, you do this for us, and we'll do this for you, and so with the Genesis thing, when he basically held a gun to their head and said, we're going to do this, how can we work together? As they iron stuff out, one of the things Sega asked, because we had already had a Madden Genesis done and it looked pretty awesome, and they said, can you help us finish Joe Montana football? Because they were really struggling with it. And, like we talked about last time, that's just an example of, they just licensed Joe Montana, put him on the cover, and, he had nothing to do with the game, right? It was just purely a license. So Tripp said, yeah, we can help you finish. So the Madden team actually had just finished the Madden first generation Genesis cart. So they turned around and basically just redid it for Joe Montana. They made a few little changes here and there, but essentially Joe Montana was Madden football, and just confidentially, nobody knew about it. I don't even think the people at Sega knew about it. In fact,
what?
A couple years ago,
bombshell.
That's amazing. Wow.
A couple years ago, I happened to have some friends that were friends with Joe Montana. Okay, and they invited me to his birthday party, and I go, and there's Joe Montana. So at dinner, I sat right across the table from Joe Montana, and I told him the story. He didn't even know.
Wow. Right. So you're telling me if I had copies of Joe Montana football and EA Madden football, I'm playing the same game. I paid twice for the same game. Wow.
It's in the game, as they say.
Actually, one One other quickie on the Madden. The guys that did all the great Genesis carts and Scott Orr and some of those developers, their inspiration for the really good Madden games was the old Atari football game Cyberball. If you've never played Cyberball, check it out. It was really awesome.
Nice.
Wow. Well, what an amazing story today of how EA got into the kart world. And really, I mean, Nick, like kind of this scrappy ragtag effort just to prove yourself, right? I mean,
it's something that you couldn't do today. Like there was a very limited window where it was kind of the Wild West, right? And there was that opportunity that Trip and you and EA saw, and they took it, right? And I mean, a Sega, we see what happened with Sega ultimately in the console game. They had a lot of mistakes along the way, though the Genesis was far and away their peak in terms of their commercial success. So for you guys to go in there and just...
Not the Dreamcast?
I wish it were. I have a soft spot for the Dreamcast, but it didn't pan out. But just like you said, for Trip to make that power play and invite them in and put those carts on the desk and be like, here's what we're doing. How would you like to work with us on it? And to ultimately get them to relent. I mean, if you want to talk about positioning a company that, eventually becomes a corporation for just massive success, to have people like that in the driver's seat so early. Like you mentioned in previous episodes, it's so important that story gets told and not just tucked away in the history books, because it's what made EA what it is today, right?
It's very true.
Well, we have more stories to tell with Don in upcoming episodes. And I think we've got even a special on Jordan himself, the good old Michael Jordan, and who's making a cameo back there with Don in the back, right? So
be right there, MJ. Hold on.
Well, we thank you, Don, for being here today for this episode, and we're looking forward to the ones upcoming. Nick, you got anything to add before we wrap up?
Just, I hope you keep giving us these surprise Paperboy stories, Don, because it seems like every episode you find some just amazing quip about Paperboy, regardless of the topic. I love it. I've learned so much.
I have a couple more really good ones, but we'll save that for the Atari segment.
I like it. All right. Well, until next time, this has been QTV Legends. We'll see you soon.